great pleasure to introduce an amazing entrepreneur, a really good friend, an amazing co-founder many times over now, who just a few months ago managed to get his second exit under his belt. And I think that makes it 2 from 2, which probably should just retire now. Keep your average at 100%. Like, if only the Don hadn't gone out for that last innings, you know. Alisdair Faulkner.
Quit while I'm ahead.
One of the co-founders of ThreatMetrix, who also managed to not only get an exit away, 2 from 2, any exit's a good exit, but actually managed to pull off an acquisition for a cool $1 billion Aussie dollars. Yeah, welcome out.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, I'm a little bit bummed. Like when Ryan Journey and folks like got acquired by Google, you know, it was like $90 to have a dinner with them, you know. And I think it's like $5, you know.
Since the financial crisis, inflation's been so low that deflation in ticket prices for an event.
That's right. No, it's great to be here, and I love to give back. You know, I'm probably, if you meet me, you know, you're probably the least likely person that you would ever assume would be associated with a $1 billion cybersecurity company. That's
true. Security, fraud, all those sorts of things. Yeah, very trustworthy guy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, I mean, it's a serious business. So just a little bit about, you know, ThreatMetrix, just what we did, and then maybe we go back a little bit.
Because none of us really run banks, so we probably have used your product but not even known it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I like to say, you know, ThreatMetrix is one of the largest, widely deployed security companies that no one's ever heard of, and that's by design. You know, our job is to work to protect customers and businesses' brands and their IP and identities, but without them having to know, you know, without them having to do anything. And so ThreatMetrix, we have a couple of key use cases. You know, one of our principal value propositions is that we instantaneously differentiate between trusted users and cyber threats in real time. And what that means is that you can more often accept more customers. You can reduce the amount of times you might deny a customer or ask them to do a 2-factor authentication or step up or, you know, re-enter their password, which has great opportunities for businesses, obviously, but also more importantly, it protects customers without them having to do something. So the key use cases we got involved with, we'd go with banking was about 50% of our market, and then e-commerce was nearly there and about that as well, and then the remainder was what we call other media and other such things. And the core use case was like payments. So if you're doing an online credit card payment, we work with some of the largest e-commerce companies in the world. And little known fact, 1 in every $3 spent online in the US, my technology protects.
Cool.
Without you knowing. And about 1 billion users' accounts are protected in real time, because we work with some of the largest banks, so nearly all the banks in the UK, Canada, 2 of the largest in the US, and about 1,000 other banks, and a few in Australia and elsewhere in the world. And so we're principally protecting payments. We're principally protecting every time you try and log on to, you know, a bank account or a mobile application, or anytime you're trying to register for a new service. And the principal problem is that identity, right, has become basically in the hands of cyber criminals. So there's no such things as secrets. Maybe 10 years ago... yes, exactly. So data breaches is a big part of it. But actually, the problem started a long time ago with porous networks. So you hear about, you know, you have an infected computer. You know, the cybersecurity is all the rage now. How do you track advanced persistent threats, i.e. somebody who installs some malware on an employee's computer, or what's called CEO or social engineering fraud, where someone will say, hey, this is the CEO, can you pay, you know, this amount of money, but it's actually a piece of malware that's executed that. And
it's pretending. Yeah.
It's pretending. You know, for a long time, people have lived with just the fact that they've known their computer's compromised, but haven't worried about it. And during that last decade, cyber criminals, state-sponsored governments and others have been creating these massive dossiers of our identities, and they're using them for very profitable means. You know, if I am you and I know your name and address and your telephone number for the vast majority of the internet that still is not ThreatMetrix customer, they can't differentiate between whether that is you or somebody who's impersonating you. And so that was principally, how do you solve that problem? If you're in an online world, and we looked at it, first company, David Jones, who was the original CEO of ThreatMetrix, Then I joined in 2016. He first had a spam detection company that got acquired. And I joined him after a first company. We can go through, that around about the time that it got acquired. And, we had this notion that back then he was trying to solve spam detection. I'm like, what was...
I probably should... So in terms of like identity though, from a technology point of view, identity's not easy because you're basically dealing with someone on the other side of a network who's asserting something, and we can't expect, the authentication to be really, really strong on both sides. Otherwise, for your e-commerce customers and your bank customers, they're just like, you just walk away, right? It's too hard. Too hard to log in, too hard to check out. So you've kind of got to have this dimension of identifying that somebody is who they say they are, or alternatively just identifying if they're definitely not who they say they are.
Correct, right?
And so from that identity point of view though, how do you guys, before we maybe jump into too much of how it came about, how do you actually do that though? Because if you guys aren't being seen and aren't part of, a customer's interaction, you've got to do some pretty special stuff to try and work out.
So, the fundamental philosophy behind ThreatMetrix, so the big aha and the insight was everybody in the world was just trusting identities and IP addresses prima facie. Okay, that's that person.
So
and
they put in the credit card number right, or they put in the username and password matched and let them in, right? Doesn't matter where they're from or what's
Exactly. And every form of authentication, pretty much online, or of verification, is a proof of existence. Does Alisdair actually exist as a person in the world? And then it's like, he does. But the problem is that no one solved, and it was wildly open still today, but I can pretend to be you. In fact, I can use a proxy or a VPN or anonymize or some service not only to be you, but I can be you from any country and IP address in the world. And we all know what an IP address is? Yes. So, but the core insight that we had was that you had all these systems that were in the banks or e-commerce store that was looking for anomalies. But they're all looking at prima facie, just trying to understand like keywords in a spam detection, right? You're trying to say, how many times has someone said Viagra? And that's the equivalent. That basically that's the way the internet works for every bank, every e-commerce company in the world. They go, does this thing make sense? Does it look unusual?
So it's sort of the pattern recognition after the damage has been done, right? After this, in the spam sense, after you've been processing a lot of it, you start to recognize it. And so the banks were presumably just looking for, has someone just logged in and then tried to empty the entire account into, the world's largest, I think, fraud carrier is Western Union. Right?
It's just looking at all those behavioral patterns. But the problem is that no one realized is that the device stands in place of the human being in interaction, right? So if you go into a store, it's you, there's a person, they can see you, a credit card, they can visualize you. But in an online interaction, it's the computer, it's the machine, actually, that is the principal thing, the material thing that, is doing the transaction. And it's just doing that transaction with your identity or your wife's identity or your girlfriend's identity. So we built some really cool technology that did a couple of things to begin with. One was we were able to pierce a proxy. So we were able to like, hey, this IP address is pretending to be in the US, but doing some, funny bugger, secret magic stuff. We were able to go, you know what? We actually detect that you're in Russia. So I don't need to know anything, your name, whether you exist, whether it's a valid credit card. If I could go to these e-commerce companies and go, this transaction with this IP address says it's in the US, we can definitively tell you the IP address, where it is in Russia, what the location is. Would you accept that transaction? And they went, no way. So not that accepting a transaction from Russia is bad, global commerce is fantastic, but the fact that it's trying to hide, that was one element of it. Right, was actually just understanding how cyber criminals work and understanding that the missing ingredient behind every fraud and authentication system was at that time that they weren't considering the device. And that IP address and the parent IP address was basically what every system runs on today and still does for the vast majority of companies. The second thing was to understand the device. Now, if you can change your IP address, but we could definitively say, look, we still know and believe that that's the same computer that did that transaction, then you could say, look, I don't need to know every valid person on the planet, all their identities like a credit bureau or anything like that. I could just say, if I've seen that same device and they use 10 different emails in the last, hour across 10 different companies or even at the same one, that doesn't smell right. And so it was building some device identification technologies that was impervious to things like cookie deletion, changing IP address, changing the fonts on my machine, all sorts of things you'd think that a cyber criminal would use to try and hide the fact that that's the same person, and combining that with, I'd say, the best on market technology to be able to detect whether someone's using an anonymizer or a proxy and where the true location was. That was the key insight. That was the beginning of ThreatMetrix. ThreatMetrix getting on a path that was ultimately successful.
So the ThreatMetrix journey started, a while back.
Yeah.
10 years plus some aha moments before that. But your journey, I think, is pretty special because, you started out. We often talk about why come to the US market. Well, Australia's a long way from markets. It's small, it's distant, it's kind of a bit frontier in terms of markets. But you grew up in a place that was real frontier. Yeah, Darwin.
I'm proud, the actual frontier. One of the few people to leave with all their teeth.
Yeah.
And just kidding. I love you all. I love you all. But I like to say Darwin, where men are men and the crocodiles are nervous.
Yes. So you grew up in Darwin, and then you moved to the big smoke, the nearest big smoke, which of course is Adelaide.
Yeah, and I like to say, look, if I can make it, anyone can. Right? And actually one of the things that during these talks, one of the things that I think is great about Aussie Founder, there's a great degree of modesty, and that very humble. And but one of the best things about Australians is that when they see someone, they go, "Oh, I can do that."
Yeah.
We just, we just never had the role models, or you've seen that. Oh, you can do that, and you look. So hopefully you see me and you go, he doesn't seem all that remarkable. Not all that remarkable. Someone born in Darwin,
mediocre, sort of pedestrian man.
Mind you, with all these teeth, I can do it.
Yes, exactly. nothing good that to work can't fix. So you'd done a whole bunch of engineering work in Adelaide, and
did some uni.
Did some uni.
Did some work.
Showed up. Did some work.
President of the Engineering Society, mind you, whatever.
Yeah, that's always a good way to make sure you get the first spot at the bar.
You're correct.
And so the thing you were talking about before was how yourself and a couple of friends who were doing your masters together.
Yeah. You
looked around and you're like, when we graduate, the opportunities we have are we get to go and work from a bank.
Yep.
Or we get to go and work for someone who makes missiles.
Right, DSTO.
DSTO is a big employer down there.
Right, in Adelaide. Yeah, exactly.
And rightly, you're like, these are two not great choices.
Yeah.
With no offence to anyone who's in that line of work at the moment, but,
Well, it was always...
not great choices.
We got to the space and we did... the government did something cool. It was like this special master's engineering program where they tried to combine, it was a scholarship program where they combined all the three universities, Flinders and whatever, and then they combined the engineering piece with also like an MBA to try and give you an appreciation of the accounting and the marketing and all those, so to give you an early exposure. And that was kind of cool. And we all graduated and we realized, look, we've invested so much money and we're doing this for ourselves. We're spending money on our education, and we'd work to 4 a.m. We'd kick footy, at midnight, to get through. And there's this funny thing. We just go, look, we need to reinvest in ourselves. At some stage, use this to do it for ourselves. So let's go out, go into industry, learn some skills, and get the band back together. And inconceivably, somehow we did.
Yeah.
So David Bond, who we did the same engineering course together, was doing some consulting around networking, and he was saying, look, packet switch networks is going to be big, let's do something. And I'm like, great. And then we're like, what was it? And I was like, well, you figure it out. I'm like, okay.
That's where you come in.
That's where you go, and so I went and worked with Accenture for a while, did process engineering, implemented SAP, very unlikely stuff, but tried to learn, just see what a real job was like, and found out, love to do something else. So after...
Tick that box.
Right, what's next?
Corporate experience.
And like all smart people went, .com crash happened around 2000, and so that... after that went, what's the best idea you could ever possibly do after all the venture capital has been sucked out, there's massive unemployed people in Silicon Valley, no one's going to invest in anything, is start a company.
In that space?
In Radelaide.
In Radelaide.
In Radelaide.
With all the venture capital that were washing through the streets. No,
not really.
Not really.
And so, so never afraid of a challenge. So And back then it was one of these things where we were like, okay, what can we do? And it really was like that. Okay, let's start a company. Now what do we do? And so I spent and it's not the way that anyone advises you should ever start a company.
No.
And but luckily, just during brainstorming, we talked to different folks, and I came across a problem that was for Accenture when we're implementing SAP, these big enterprise systems that they roll out to 1,000 branch networks and things like that, and they would complain. They go, it's slow, the system's slow out in whichever branch network is in whoop whoop. And translate for the American viewers that whoop whoop is somewhere
a long way away.
Not in the major city.
Somewhere in Montana, just this side of the border.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And whoop whoop. And they'd complain, and then the network administrators and computer administrators say, look, we've got enough servers, it's fine, it's idle, like there's no problem. And then everyone would say, so slow. And then it was like, I had a conversation, with a guy who goes, oh, well, that's the problem.
Back in the day, it's like frame relay and
this was
stringing together a bunch of ISDNs with some baling wire and just hoping for the best.
Yeah, exactly. Like 128 kilobits per second was like, ISDN, woo.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a real issue, and it was a real issue then, and that we realized, well, what's the problem? And it's like, well, you realize that the internet, TCP, IP, doesn't actually differentiate between applications natively.
Yeah.
It rewards the greediest application. So if you've got a video or something like that needs, or an email with a large attachment, it actually prioritizes or preferences those with the bigger bandwidth. And so we realized there was an opportunity. Look, there needs to be something that prioritizes applications on networks so that you can accelerate things like your voice over IP or a mission critical application that needed to have millisecond response time. And that was the genesis of 4Sticks at that time. And funny name, 4Sticks, was actually named after, anyone guess where 4Sticks might come from as a name? What's that?
The AFL goals?
Nearly. That was actually the number one guess.
Super guess.
We actually, for our R&D, the Australian R&D application, that was the answer. The investment. The real answer was a drummer from Led Zeppelin. Was meant to be so good that people thought that he had 4 sticks instead of 2, with only 1 arm. So that's where it came from. Not a really good branding idea, but anyhow, we did a lot wrong, and that was probably one of the least of the wrong things that we did. But we created a company that prioritized applications over networks, and that eventually got acquired. We hired Alan Noble in 2002, the CTO, as CTO, and he eventually went on to be he retired just this year, but the head of engineering for Google in Australia. And so, but that got bought out. It was great. And that's how I came across the path of David Jones. We had a mutual board member that we knew who introduced us to and said, you guys should talk together, and that was kind of the beginning of the ThreatMetrix journey back in 2016 for me, late 2005, 2016, 2006.
Yeah. So David, I think many of the StartMate crowd will have gotten to meet David Jones. He's a very active mentor out of Sydney.
Brilliant guy.
And what you and he... So it's actually probably worth doing a slight divergence and talk about his journey real briefly to explain some kind of the context. So he'd done a whole lot of spam detection work, hadn't he?
Right, yep. He got acquired, and his company got acquired. His EmuTech got acquired by Surf Control, which is now WebSense, which is like one of the more established kind of web filtering, threat filtering companies. Yeah. And so I was like, what would you like to do? And he goes, well, we've got this contract with the Australian government trying to prosecute spammers, like people who are trying to spam, and they were actually they passed a thing called the Spam Act and ACMA in Australia, which was the Australian Communications Media Authority or something like that, was trying to contract with them to try and build a system to help prosecute spammers.
Which, aside from the system piece, is actually really fascinating that the Australian government decided that they would get into this in a law enforcement way and actually try and prosecute spammers. The number of spam calls I still get daily here.
That's amazing.
It's breathtaking.
Australia
actually gave a damn and tried to solve it.
Well, absolutely.
It's almost
to the credit.
We can kick the NBN all we like, but I mean, they've actually given a damn.
But to the credit, both my first company and then also ThreatMetrix benefited from the R&D grant, which was a very, very valuable piece of government assistance that I'm not sure how prevalent it is now. It's been a while since I lived in Australia, but that was so key. Because the advantage that it gave over some of the more marketing type grants, so it enabled you to invest in hard tech. We were trying to build prioritizing packet scheduling software that prioritized application, latency. It was tough stuff.
Yeah.
And they helped us to get that off. So his company got acquired, and he was like, and he had this contract, and saying, look, what I'd like to do is an IP address. Okay, let me remind back. One of the things with spam detection that got harder and harder was this keyword, right? You've got to look at keywords.
It kept getting rewritten with exclamation marks.
Right, changing fonts and things like that. It was a losing game. But then if we start tracking the IP addresses that spam come from,
the originating source.
Exactly. Then we can be more accurate. And the example he gave is like if a package lands on your desk and it says from Obama, not Obama, Osama.
So if a package comes
or any president,
or
terrorist, skating on thin ice, you don't have to open it, right? If you know where it comes from, the analogy is you don't have to open it. Got it, we're with it. And so that was the core thing. I went, great, awesome. So I was looking at a few other things, and like Google, Alan was at the same, interviewed there, and I was like, well, looking at doing this thing, and it's like, well, there's this idea about, trying to track IP addresses and catalog and basically build like something like a credit risk, not exactly, it's not a credit score, but a risk score for every IP address on the planet.
So you basically index every IP address, then as soon as you see it's a bad actor, you go, all right, that gets a little bit more of a score.
A bit more of a score, that kind of thing. Anyway, Google, we're taught to think really big, but he said, that sounds crazy. And then that's when I went, actually, it could be a good idea.
Yeah.
Because the things that people say are the craziest, then it's like, if it's a little bit crazy enough, then that gave it like, okay, that sounds like a good idea. And then in 2007, Ironport got acquired by Cisco for $830 million US, coincidentally, approximately the same price as ThreatMetrix. And their principal core technology behind the accuracy of their spam detection was this IP reputation. And I went, oh shit.
Trying to build.
We're at the start of trying to build something that someone just got acquired for $1 billion. Lesson be learned if you're getting to the fraud detection, digital identity, device identification space.
That ship has sailed.
Just saying, ship may or may not have sailed. And so that was a bit of an oh shit moment for us. Like what do we do and how do we extend that? But the core principle at that time was, that gave me great comfort was, look, these IP addresses that were sending spam, it didn't take a genius to forward play that and go, what happens if they're not trying to send you spam? What if they're trying, if you can pretend to be from anywhere at any time, why wouldn't you use that to like do counterfeit credit card transactions or
something a lot more valuable than spam?
Absolutely, it's got to be profitable. And then, that's one trend, and then you go, wow, okay, if that's going to happen, which I would do if I was,
if I was up to no good.
If I was up to no good. Devious mind, but good intent, I think. It's a heart of gold. White hat. So that was one trend. The other trend was automation and bots. Like how long is it going to be before someone could really emulate me, not just send spam, but actually know who I am and do that at great scale? And then I thought, what happens if transactions, like every credit card transaction, if fraud, instead of being like 1 in every 1,000 transaction is fraudulent, what happens if it's the other way around, like spam today, right? The great majority of email, like 98 to 99% of all email sent is spam, right? It's only about 1 or 2% is actually valid email. But we get by. No one knows about that, right? And we've got really good tools to solve that problem. But if you fast forward and go, what happens if you live in a world where my identity is going to be breached and owned by somebody, my IP address that they use, they can be anyone from anywhere, they can use advanced automation, and if you're instead of like 1 in every transaction's bad, it's 1 in every 100 transactions is good. How do you operate in that environment where the signal to noise is just incredible? So that was the core premise, that problem, right? That was the problem that I went, far out, Brussels sprout.
It's going to be a big problem.
That's going to be a big problem, and I felt like, hey, that's a tomorrow problem, that's a, but 10 years later, that we're really seeing how real that is now, where you can use deep learning technologies to replicate a video and use my voice, and you can basically make Alisdair sound like and look like he's saying anything online. Yeah.
So anyway, good like that's our like caveat thing.
Exactly.
You don't say anything in the rest of the talk.
Yeah, it wasn't me.
Yeah.
It was that spot. But I guess the takeaway from that is, other than a long story, is that I fell in love with the problem. Yeah. I just went far out. Like, if someone doesn't solve this, the internet as we know it, and the promise of the internet to deliver services to those who don't even have access to water, who don't, they're going to be denied all that, and that really scares the absolute crap out of me. And still to this day, what kept me going through all the things that, happened to you as you're going along your journey, was that it wasn't even that ThreatMetrix there had to be some company that succeeded, otherwise we're all fudged. Yeah. You know what I mean?
It's interesting, that very mission-driven approach.
Yeah.
I see that with a lot of the founders that I get to meet who are actually like making it, because there's just way too much friction and way too much like gravitational pull, and the odds of success are so low that you almost need to be like a zealot or mission-driven to be able to have a chance.
Well, I feel a little bit like, the sky is falling, like you're that Chicken Little, like ding, 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 and the sky actually is falling.
Yeah.
But it's like Einstein said, genius is obvious in hindsight. And I'm not saying genius at all, but it's like one of those problems where I could see clearly. Yeah. I could see this is going to face the world, and how do we solve it? And so it scared the shit out of me that if this problem wasn't solved, it would be a problem. And I didn't fall in love with this was our solution for it. I didn't fall in love with the product. I didn't fall in love with the technology or the approach,
or even who the exact customer was.
And that's what kept us going, I guess.
That's cool. So you kicked that off, and it's 2008. You've been working with Dave for a bit, and then there's this juncture of it's time to go to the US. It's time to get to the US market, and part of that was because your investors reasonably were like, you know what, that's where the action is. You need to get there. How did that play out, and how, I guess, significant was it that you came out here and
we did a lot. We blazed a lot of ground for Adelaide. We like to think so anyway, but that we wanted to do everything from Adelaide. We felt passionately. The tagline, to Dave Bond's credit, was we wanted to create opportunities for smart and talented people. That was principally, like, hey, let's start this company for this reason, such that, it really irked us that Australians think we can be the best footballers on the planet, the best sports people, the best sales people, boats people on the world. But technology must be someone else's thing. Qantas, let's just keep building things, digging things out of the ground. And that really, really, at a fundamental level, irks me. And obviously, for people like Mike Cannon Brooks and those, and Scott at Atlassian, thankfully, they took the mantle of that, where people like go, oh yeah, wow, a nearly $10 billion company, it is possible, Australia can do it. But one of the traps of that was that we were steadfast and we wanted to do it from Adelaide, and we expanded internationally, and probably too fast. We put about 6 people in the US, we're in Singapore, we're in Germany, but this is also the irony of being an Australian technology company. We had the Germans, the German government buying our technology and installing our technology on networks. If we go down, everything goes down. That was that kind of mission critical technology, and they were buying it before Australian companies would. But that's just the irony, and it's still to this day.
No, it's the cultural cringe, isn't it?
It's the cultural cringe.
Yeah. Maybe just not having to compete really, because they, sort of stay in these oligopolies where.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a shame. It'll take time. It's a generational thing. But anyway, and I forgot my point, so no time for next question.
So you were like intensely wanting to do it from Adelaide. You had
expanded.
You expanded internationally, but you did it in a way that was a bit arm's length, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so that was the core problem. And one of the things we learned with this one, which was really good, and David was also great in that, like, he went, you know what, I want to be in Australia, but we also know that the opportunity is to be the US. That's where the funding is, that's where the market is. And, he was happy to say, okay, and let's get a US CEO or someone who's done it before. And for me too, that was also a great idea, because the best thing you can have is learn from somebody that,
been there and done that.
Yeah, you can accelerate your own learning. Yeah. And I didn't appreciate why that was the case until I got here. And you're on that first sales call with the first US salesperson that you've hired, and they get asked a question and they go, oh, okay, I guess we're not a good fit. And you're there, and you're going, hang on, why didn't you ask that question?
We are a good fit.
Yeah, we are a good fit. Or,
back on the phone.
oh, yeah, exactly. And so, every single one of those interactions, you just can't do a remote control. I mean, unless you kind of get a transplant there with the culture, and it has to be someone associated with product or the technical founder or someone who can effectively be the pre-sales and get that religion. That, to me, was the key and the major difference between why ThreatMetrix was a success, or as big a success it was in comparison to 4.6, which became NetPriva, which was still a good outcome.
Yeah.
Yep. But just not to the same degree.
Yeah, absolutely. So you were the guy. They were like, all right, cool. We're opening a US office or hiring a US CEO, and you're the co-founder. You go and do it.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, once David said I'm staying, then yeah, agreed. But no, it was okay. Go over. Hire. And actually, our investors said
showing up here 10 years ago, financial crisis. I can imagine the discretionary budget from anyone who was going to buy your stuff disappeared. You guys sell to banks. I mean, God, half of them didn't know if they were still going to be around in a while.
Yeah. You got to earn the right. So selling to banks happened quite a while later. Had to earn the right. So we obviously walked ourselves up.
Did you guys sell by selling to the adult entertainment industry?
Never.
Damn. So that's always like the hallmark of really, really good technical technology is it actually cuts its teeth selling and solving problems that only the edges of society actually make happen.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, our competitors did. It was more an issue of scale, to be honest, than anything else.
Too big for you.
Yeah, exactly. Like the technology was like.
God, I'm going to leave all those puns right alone.
Okay, yeah, exactly.
So anyway,
so it was less, and also the VCs also they knew that. Look, and this is one thing I like to tell Australians that come over is that, sure, go anywhere that you can have wherever makes operational sense for your company. If you want to run that company, and you don't need a significant investment, and you don't have significant ambitions for the outcome, set up in Denver or whatever. Yep. But you should know that all the exits come from Silicon Valley, or the vast majority of the exits come from Silicon Valley. And the reason for that is the vast amount of investment is in the Silicon Valley. And it's those investor networks that then have the entrees, it's, Cisco, I'm going to buy from, whatever, US venture partners again, or, those are the relationships that are enduring over time that, the corporate development companies are, you don't realize how tightly connected the VCs are in terms of getting the head CIO of, Bank of America and others, bring them in, here's our latest startup batch, what do you think of them?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, this year, $9 billion in the US was invested in startups this first quarter. 75% of that was in Silicon Valley. Nearly 50% of that, 40-odd%, 43, 47, I can't remember, was seed and Series A investing.
So it's not all just going to Uber this time.
It's not all going to Uber, exactly. So that's the real reason, is to, if you think you're going to need funding and you want to give yourself the best chance for the funding that gives you the best opportunity to exit, that's why you want to eventually come over here.
Yeah. So you've shown up, it's OA, you're just trying to grind through.
Hire a CEO, we interview, get on board. And Reed Townsley was fantastic CEO. I say was part of the acquisition. He's moving on. But what was really attractive about him, and the opportunity to work with him, is that he'd taken a couple of companies public. There's different candidates, and all had strengths and weaknesses. But thinking in that position is like, who am I going to
learn the most from?
And he was fantastic. Someone who knew what the end goal was and what scale looked like, I could learn a lot from. Yeah. And it's been true.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what are some of the key lessons that you take away from the last 10 years as you scaled from was probably you're going to fit the whole US team in the back of a taxi to your exit. Like what are some of the insights for those that are early on that journey as well to maybe take away? Anything that sort of stands out?
I mean, I think one of those was the transplanting. I mean, I just see getting you or someone the founder or one of the co-founders or someone that you trust here. You see companies come in as part of the start. It's far less now, but you see companies come here for StartMate or other programs, accelerated programs. Go back and then we can just raise money from Australia, and it's much harder. It's changing. Like one of our investors. was like, oh yeah, we just sent a term sheet, term sheet for an Australian company. So it's changing now. Like investors in ThreatMetrix now, probably investors in Acello understand that model. It's becoming a lot more comfortable, but you can't replace having the founder here. And having a US company also, those things also do matter. It can be an Australian company, but if you're a fantastic company, you don't need money, you can do whatever you want. But typically that's not the case. But the reason is just because they know, look, here's our term sheets, we know how the US government law works, and US contracts are hard enough, and the arguments are drawn out enough than having to do that on someone else's paper or other law or jurisdiction.
It's enough reason for that. And because there's such a procession of great stuff that comes through here, and 75% of the money comes from here, then they can afford to basically be picky and just go, nah, we'll pass, thanks very much.
Yeah, I mean, things that I don't have an answer for is like, how do you know when you should give up? Yeah. I had other companies that got in the similar space where you're competitors, but not really competitors, you're competing for budget. You're not doing the same thing, but you might be competing for a fraud budget or a security budget. And even I remember what the CEO, one got acquired, is like, why are you still there? Why? It's a good question. And you ask yourself that continually, obviously. Like, are you sinking good after bad? How do you know that answer? And I don't know what that answer was, but I guess just knowing when I woke up,
the mission still plays a key part, right?
Yeah, you still, this is...
The problem hasn't been solved yet. The budget might have gone to these guys selling steak.
Right.
The budget might have gone to something that was solving yesterday's threat. It's going to be pissed against a wall.
Yeah.
That somebody's going to say that it was still invested before they get fired for another breach.
Yeah, exactly.
And you guys were just like, I'm going to keep at it no matter what.
And the other thing too is, what did I learn? Sales. Not necessarily me as a salesperson.
You're a bit shy, right? Just kidding.
Still shy. But, I'm like anyone. Like, I did master's engineering. Unless I passionately believe in something, I can't sell it to somebody else. And unlike some people, I'm not good at making my own reality. Some entrepreneurs are brilliant at it. Like I'm sure Steve Jobs, or they can make their own reality, and everyone else conforms to it. I'm not like that. I have to fundamentally believe what I'm doing is right, and that is a competitive weapon. There is nobody who can sell like you as the founder. Is the one thing also I want you to realize that, and sales, understanding what that meant. Like the first mistake most companies do, or we did in our first one, was go, oh, we need to hire someone who actually knows what they're doing. So you hire a VP or someone who's way too experienced from some large company, and you don't have all the processes, the support staff, all the product maturity that you expect and need and know, and they end up failing, and because you're not familiar with it, you can't take it over, and learning that motion. And one of the best things we did was to hire as an inside salesperson. First hire, when we got here in the US, and that was Reed, obviously. Okay, let's get an inside salesperson, help vet. And what I really liked about this person was when I interviewed him, I said, okay, what do you think you need to be successful? And it's a really good question to ask. Because it will tease out the, what's your market budget? If you're talking to a head sales, how much you're spending on marketing? How many lead generation people do you have? How many people on this? How many people can do work that I don't actually have to do?
How much are you going to just put it all in front of you? So
Exactly. His answer was, I just need you. I'll get you the meeting. I just need you to talk, because they're going to believe you, and that was probably one of the best pieces of advice, the best single thing we did, because I would just go, it was amazing. I would just go, look, this company over here has this problem, and here's why. He'd call up the receptionist, he'd do anything possible. It was amazing. He'd get someone on the phone, then hit speakerphone and go, just got our founder walking past, come in, call. And then, that was, it was hand to combat sales, like that call by call, like just doing all of that motion. And you're doing it. So you're seeing when, we're saying something wrong, we're getting instant feedback, and you can continue to learn. And so that was like, oh, wow, I never knew anything about sales, or that you could accomplish so much with just, a relatively modest set of resources. You didn't have to have the big VP title. You didn't have to have the big deal closer that we probably thought we needed to do. You do need those people Eventually, depending on your business model, but not back then.
Ah, that's cool.
So not all that prophetic, sorry.
No, that's actually really helpful. It's the number of failed first VP of sales hires is something approaching probability of 1. So
yeah, I mean, it's a tough job. I mean, I think the average lifespan of a VP of sales is 18 months, if that, So it's a high turnover thing. But, the other thing is you can't hire, when you hire a VP of sales or a VP of marketing here or a VP of services, you're hiring them based on a template and a plan that they know how to execute on based on their previous success model. Don't hire them too early if you don't actually have a planned, you know how the sales execution, you know how that works. And then you go, great, now I've got this sales execution model, I know the objections, I know who we're competing with, we know what the budget is to go, here's the kinds of things we're looking at. Is that what you've done in the past? Okay, now replicate that and supercharge it. And they can bring the teams and they can help you scale. But not hire a VP and go, now can you start with a blank piece of paper?
Yeah, you get the playbook from the last thing, which might not match at all.
Exactly. Yeah. Cool. So that was very interesting. The other pieces were, just the whole venture capital and obviously the acquisition process was amazing learning experience.
Yeah.
Learning to pitch, doing all that, going through that sales motion. And
you guys, because you had other people who were similar in the market but not directly competitors, but solving problems that were adjacent, all getting hoovered up by some of the big in town. You must have had so many false start dog and pony shows. It's not funny.
Oh, I mean, I used to laugh at ThreatMetrix. We two things I'd say. One is that we do the impossible things really well. We're amazing at the most impossible things technology-wise. We do that amazing.
Real-time analysis of all these devices where the profile's changing of bad guys in real time is kind of nuts.
We would do at least 1 trillion matches at least a second. Yeah, so it's not just devices. So what we built was a shared network, which is basically, so what happens every time a transaction happens on the internet, let's say one of our customers, and also either mobile or web, we're on about 300 million mobile devices, probably 350 now, embedded there somewhere. The moment that device turns up that website and you enter in and say, okay, I want to log in, username, password, hit enter. In that 30 milliseconds it takes us to do a response. We've looked at that. We basically pull a fingerprint of that device, so we look at all the different attributes, like what's a font, what's a screen resolution, or if it's a mobile, is it Android, what orientation, all that sort of thing to try and, what version, all those things to go, this is a unique identifier for that device. And then we look at the identity associated with it, whether it's an email, a telephone number, or an IP address. Then we look at across our global history for every single customer for all time, every single interaction that those things have done, and all the interactions that those things have interacted with. So this massive device graph, and so computationally, it's incredible. And a lot of it, it's just, the brains of it is Australian engineering, really. Of course, we have fantastic US counterparts, but the core engine team is still in Australia. That fundamentally is responsible for this amazing event processing center. So not only is it examining and looking at all that history, it's now saying, actually, I want to apply this risk model based on you're doing now a payment. Now I want to base this as an authentication model. Now I want to base this on an account acquisition model. So it's running multiple different scenarios, and it's doing that very, 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 very quickly. And yeah, it's a fantastic privilege that at least several hundreds of billions of dollars rely on us being real-time, up and available. And I can tell you when I thought that actually we were going to make it was when one of our largest customers, we have an API call, let's say if you're doing a payment or logging in, and one of their contractors had forgot to key a timeout to our API, right? And we had this executive offsite, maybe when we were about 30 people or so in the US office, and we were all out on boats, so we were all out here on the bay boats having this great, company offsite, great old party, and then we have these 2 carrier grade switches in our major data center back then. This is like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and one of them failed. I mean, these are carrier grade switches, I won't name who they were, and it failed. So we're out in the water, stops, one of our largest, and you'd know them, largest e-commerce companies in the US and probably the world, all of a sudden starts blocking transactions because it's failing. They forgot to do a timeout. So It was,
They're like e-commerce guys saying, ThreatMetrix, do we trust this guy? And you're not answering. It's like, right, if we don't trust them, then
there we go. We're not doing it. So I think it's only like 6,000 transactions a minute or something that was costing him. So the CEO calls down to the fraud and says, get that shoot off my site.
Yeah.
Self-editing here. Get that shoot off my site. We were back on that site within 1 week.
Wow.
That never happens
After you've had a fuck-up. Yeah.
That never happens if you are not critical to the business process and success of that operation, because within that 1 week they lost $10 million.
Yeah.
And that's what people don't appreciate, the scale of the fraud and automation. There are, and I won't tell you names, but there are very large names. They know that fraudsters are actively testing them, just their availability. If they detect that their system is down, where their fraud detection authentication system is down for a split second, within that period of time, they'll have created 6,000 new user accounts, or execute 10,000 new campaigns, or sign. It's so fast, so automated. It's scary, but you can see why I'm excited by the problem, right? It's a cool, hard problem to solve, and a fun one, and a rewarding one to solve.
That's awesome. Now's a great time to probably throw it open for questions.
Sure.
Any questions from the floor?
What do you feel about raising money here versus in Australia? I'm sure that, depending on your business, what's right for your business is right for your business. I'm sure the US, I think, is probably the first step, the bigger hurdle, being US or not US. Yeah, and the same law is probably the bigger hurdle. And then
a company out of Delaware
yeah.
And all that stuff. Yeah.
And LA, depending on, if you're in fashion or media tech, could be really the smarter place to be, because maybe you've got investors who know that. But is it common to be based in LA and raise here? I think the common model is that you're based in the valley and you raise in the valley. But depending what base means, base might mean you have your product team here, product marketing team here, but your sales force in LA or Salt Lake City or something like that. Or it could be, you don't have to exclusively raise. All I'm just saying is the odds are in your favor. If you can get Australian investment, we took Australian investment, and thank you to Mark Gill and, Mike Zimmerman and others who helped us very early, and Alan Aaron, very early on as investors in ThreatMetrix. But that was seen as a step to go to the US to then get credentialed. I think it was when we put on US Venture Partners, who was, probably one of the preeminent security investors in Silicon Valley. Once we became in that kind of ecosystem, we became real in that sense. Too many US people, too many service providers, to our bankers.
The credibility factor.
Silicon Valley Bank, many of these other sorts of affiliated services, like we got raised debt for a while. Those sorts of things just become a lot easier. So it's not saying you can't do it. I'm just saying you're just stacking more and more things in your favor if you follow that pattern.
Did you ever stop selling?
Yeah, it was still maybe a better way to put it is you're always doing pre-sales. Maybe that's the way. You want to hire closers and people that can get the deal across the line, but that never ever goes. That leadership, sales leadership, never goes away. Should never go away from the fan, in my opinion. You don't have to be the salesperson. You don't have to be the VP of sales, but you're still setting the vision for and you still get involved. Yeah, absolutely. For big major deals, you're there and you're explaining, because no one's going to explain to them better why you're the right solution. And I can tell you there's something very powerful when you go to a customer and learning about selling, consulting. I'm not a salesperson, but I was there really and our business model, I'll tell you why it worked for both us and the customer, is we worked on a paid proof of concept or a proof of value or production pilot, because we sold to business to businesses. We never did enterprises. Yeah. So it was not, we never did a free proof of concept ever. If you wanted one, walk away. Had banks like, you have to give it to us free, bye. See you later. But we figured out our sales motion where we could say, look, if you pay us, don't pay for the product, pay for the consulting, for our time, because we can help you figure out, even if you don't choose us, it's a way of being able to spend a small amount of money ahead of a larger purchase. And if you decide not to go with us, that's fine. You'll at least be able to say, look, we did, we got this out of it. We understood our customers. We understood what our threats looked like, and we realized that there was some better tool. But what's even more powerful was that I knew that our competitors, if they went with another solution, it wouldn't work for them. Like that person might end up getting fired.
The bank will be back in 6 months with a new CTO or a new CSO or something.
You know, and that's the thing about selling again. You know, something that's free or cheap. You know, and knowing and having that passionately where you go fine, and you can help that customer, and where the two things aligned between those two perspectives is because it cost us money. Really, you know, proof of concept. Even though we got paid, you broke even. It cost money. It was an investment. I wanted to qualify the customer out. And when you're in that situation, it's really powerful. Not to say, even when we didn't have miles and pipeline to here to Wazoo, from Kalamazoo or wherever, up the Wazoo, off Kalamazoo, thank you, from Whoop Whoop, thank you. That, you know, I really want to qualify them out. And, you know, I'd say, look, I want to figure out, I don't want us to do this and invest if we're not the right solution. So here's this, you know, if you can do this. If this is this that you're interested in, then go for that. And the best thing about free is you say, look, free is expensive if it ends up not solving your problem and costing you a lot of money. And I'm proud to say people who bought ThreatMetrix got promoted. You know, they ended up running the team. They ended up transforming the way that company looked at. And one of the better kind of methodologies, I think, for marketing, it's called a sales methodology, the challenger sale. Yeah. If you're not familiar with it, it's sold as a sales methodology, but it's not a sales methodology. Actually, it's more of a marketing methodology. And the idea behind the challenger sale is you can talk to anybody, any executive, if you can tell them something about their business that they didn't know, that is, you know, valuable and that will help them. If you can tell them something about their business that they didn't know, valuable and help them, and if you can tell them that the way, or show them that the way they've been thinking about the problem was wrong, or not, you know, wasn't helping them, and that the challenge, I suggest you look at it. It's really good because you could go in there and go, look, these guys are buying. We'd compete against companies that sell like device intelligence because that's where we started doing that. And they go, oh, these guys do device intelligence. They're way cheaper. And I'm like, you don't have a device intelligence problem. You have an account authentication problem. You know, that device is one aspect. Or you'd go into a customer and say, look, we've got someone who's selling us bot detection because they're telling us all these bots are taking over accounts. You go, sure, bots are one issue. But you've got an account takeover problem and you've got a customer friction issue. You know, or they'll go, oh, we're not losing any fraud. I said, yeah, you're not losing any fraud, but you're denying, you know, 10% of your transactions, and our customers typically only ever deny 0.2% of transactions. So there's 10% of revenue you're potentially leaving on the table.
What else can you see 10% top of line improvement from?
Right, so just changing and your marketing materials and all those sorts of things. If you can educate and give them true insight to say, the thing that they're trying to sell you isn't actually the thing that's going to solve your problem. Here's how I can help you save money, not go down the wrong path. Be a consulting advisor. So, and the funny thing is, even if you're a SaaS company and you're selling to a business, you might argue how much services you need or how much touch you need, but you're selling a solution, a business solution to them. And if you can help solve that business problem for them and you're the one that they feel that can provide that expertise, then you do have a competitive advantage in doing that.
What's next?
Excellent question. Well, you know, so I still don't think that all the problems are solved. You know, it's a huge problem. I think LexisNexis acquired us. They have, you know, one of the largest identity bureaus. What I like about them is they're not a credit bureau per se. They're more involved in helping you to solve business problems around fraud and other sorts of things. And they're a great asset to have the two. You know, we have this digital identity, and our whole hallmark is we built this global intelligence network. How do you do that around identities and intelligence? By anonymization. So our catchphrase was, we don't need to know your name to know you're not who you say you are. Yeah. Whereas they knew definitively, though, hey, this person, to satisfy regulatory requirements, you need to positively identify people sometimes, and you need technology to figure out, even if they is positively a real person, that, you know, there's not something anomalous. So there's great things that can be done there, but the problem is only going to get worse, unfortunately. So I don't know. The horizon is still untracked, yeah, but a long way to go.
Well, if you could all join me in saying a big thank you to Al, and
thank you, everyone. Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks, Jeff.